Hi, everyone. Today, we're diving into one of the most talked about, analyzed, and debated true crime cases in American history. A case that shook Beverly Hills in the late 1980s, a story of privilege, pressure, and tragedy that exposed the dark underside of the so-called American dream. This is the Menendez Brothers, Murder, Money, and the American Dream. The perfect family image at first glance, the Menendez family seemed like a portrait of success. José and Mary Louise Kitty Menendez lived with their two sons, Lyle and Erik, in a sprawling Beverly Hills mansion worth millions. José was the embodiment of ambition, a Cuban immigrant who had escaped poverty and built an extraordinary career. He rose through the corporate ranks, eventually becoming a top executive at RCA Records and later moving into the entertainment business. He was known as driven, intimidating, and fiercely competitive. He demanded excellence not only from himself, but from his sons. Kitty, on the other hand, had once dreamed of becoming an actress. Instead, she became a devoted housewife, though friends described her as anxious, lonely, and dependent on medication to manage her emotions. To outsiders, they looked like the classic American dream family: wealth, success, and luxury. But behind the mansion walls, something darker was brewing. Growing up, Menendez, Lyle, and Erik grew up under enormous pressure. Their father expected perfection in academics, sports, and discipline. Lyle, the older brother, was confident but rebellious. Erik, the younger one, was quiet, sensitive, and often looked up to his brother for guidance. Both attended elite schools and had access to everything most teenagers could only dream of: luxury cars, vacations, and social status. But their relationship with their parents, especially their father, was reportedly strict and tense. José Menendez was described as controlling, the kind of man who didn't tolerate disobedience. Kitty's mental health deteriorated over the years, creating a tense emotional environment. The boys were expected to succeed, not just for themselves, but as reflections of their father's legacy. The pressure cooker was set, and eventually it exploded. August 20th, 1989. It was a quiet Sunday night in Beverly Hills. José and Kitty Menendez were relaxing in their den after dinner, watching television. Lyle and Erik weren't home, or so it seemed. According to later court testimony, the brothers entered the house with two 12-gauge shotguns they had purchased days earlier. What happened next would become one of the most infamous moments in American criminal history. Both parents were shot and killed. When police arrived, they found no signs of forced entry and no immediate suspects. The scene looked professional, as if it might have been a mob hit. That's exactly what the brothers wanted investigators to believe. The grieving sons in. The days following the murders, Lyle and Erik appeared heartbroken. They wept publicly, attended the funeral, and comforted relatives. But their behavior soon began to raise eyebrows. They started spending money, a lot of money. Within weeks, the brothers bought luxury cars, designer clothes, expensive watches, and even a restaurant in Princeton, New Jersey. Their sudden lavish spending spree totaled nearly $700,000 in just a few months. The image of two grieving sons began to fade, replaced by growing suspicion. Something didn't add up. The investigation tightens. The Beverly Hills Police Department initially focused on possible professional motives. José had enemies in the business world, and the crime scene looked deliberate. But as weeks passed with no leads, attention shifted closer to home. Detectives began scrutinizing the brothers' behavior. Their spending, their odd stories, and their overall demeanor became impossible to ignore. A break came when Erik, overwhelmed with guilt, confessed the murders to his psychologist, Dr. L. Jerome Oziel. Oziel's girlfriend later told police about the confession, and from that moment, the investigation zeroed in on the Menendez brothers. By March 1990, both Lyle and Erik were arrested. The trials begin. What followed was one of the most sensational trials in American history, a media circus that captivated millions. The defense claimed the brothers acted out of fear and long-term abuse. They argued that José had been emotionally and physically abusive and that the boys had been living in constant terror. According to their lawyers, the murders were not about money, they were about survival. The prosecution, on the other hand, painted a different picture. They said Lyle and Erik were spoiled, entitled, and motivated purely by greed, desperate to inherit their parents' fortune. The courtroom became a battleground for two competing narratives: abuse and fear versus greed and entitlement. America Watch's television cameras captured every moment. For the first time, America saw the full emotional weight of a family tragedy unfold live. Millions watched Lyle and Erik break down on the stand, describing alleged years of sexual and emotional abuse. Public opinion was sharply divided. Some saw them as victims, products of a toxic family system. Others saw them as manipulative killers trying to justify a cold-blooded crime. It was raw, emotional, and deeply uncomfortable. In 1994, after 2 mistrials, the brothers were tried again, this time together, without the same allowances for emotional testimony. The jury found them both guilty of first-degree murder. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The aftermath, the verdict closed one chapter but opened another. In the decades since, the Menendez case has remained one of the most debated in true crime history. Supporters argue the brothers were victims of long-term trauma, pushed to the edge. Critics insist they were greedy and manipulative, killing their parents to access wealth and freedom. But one thing is undeniable: their story revealed the darker side of privilege and pressure. Even in the heart of Beverly Hills, tragedy can hide behind perfect lawns and designer curtains. Pop culture and public perception. Over the years, the Menendez brothers have become cultural icons, not heroes but symbols of a larger conversation about family, abuse, and justice. Their story inspired documentaries, TV dramas, and podcasts. In 2017, the Law and Order true crime series revisited the case, reigniting debate among younger audiences. On social media, a new wave of viewers began to sympathize with them, particularly Erik, whose emotional breakdowns in court resurfaced on platforms like TikTok and YouTube. Many began to question, did the system fail to understand trauma? Or did media manipulation rewrite the facts? This new generation, detached from the 1990s tabloid hysteria, sees the brothers not just as criminals, but as complex human beings shaped by an impossible upbringing. Inside prison, Lyle and Erik were initially housed in separate prisons for nearly 22 years. In 2018, after decades of separation, they were finally reunited at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego, California. They reportedly embraced in tears upon seeing each other again, two brothers bound by blood, tragedy, and time. Since then, both have lived relatively quiet lives. They've participated in prison programs, continued education, and occasionally shared messages through advocates and supporters outside the prison system. Neither has ever recanted their story of abuse. Revisiting the evidence, let's take a step back. Was justice served? Critics of the verdict argue that the case lacked full understanding of psychological trauma, especially from the perspective of abuse survivors in the 1980s and early 1990s. At that time, conversations around domestic abuse were far less nuanced than they are today. The idea that a wealthy, privileged family could also be dysfunctional, even abusive, was something many Americans refused to accept. Psychologists have since debated whether Lyle and Erik's actions could have stemmed from battered child syndrome, a concept often applied in cases involving long-term trauma. Still, others insist that despite any hardship, premeditated murder cannot be justified, and the brothers' behavior after the killings, especially their extravagant spending, pointed clearly to greed. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in the middle, a complex mix of fear, resentment, and the unbearable weight of expectations. The American dream questioned. The Menendez case shattered a powerful illusion that wealth and success guarantee happiness. In many ways, José Menendez embodied the American dream. He built his fortune from nothing, achieving everything society defines as success. But the story of his family revealed something deeper. When ambition turns into control, when pressure replaces compassion, and when appearance matters more than emotional truth, even the dream can become a nightmare. This tragedy wasn't just about crime. It was about the collapse of a family under the weight of image and expectation. Media, money, and morality. The Menendez case became a media goldmine. Talk shows, tabloids, and TV specials turned tragedy into entertainment. News networks replayed emotional clips, analyzed body language, and speculated endlessly about motives. This wasn't just a trial, it was content. The brothers' tears became memes before memes even existed. And their story became a mirror reflecting society's obsession with wealth, fame, and scandal. Even today, YouTube, TikTok, and streaming platforms continue to profit from this case, turning true pain into digital engagement. Reflection and legacy. More than 30 years later, the Menendez story remains a cautionary tale. It reminds us that the line between victim and perpetrator isn't always clear. It forces us to ask difficult questions. What happens when children are raised without emotional safety? When power replaces love? And when appearances matter more than truth? Whether you believe the brothers acted out of fear or greed, the Menendez case endures because it challenges our assumptions about family, justice, and privilege. It's not just a story of crime, it's a story of humanity, flawed and fragile. The Menendez brothers' story continues to echo through documentaries, classrooms, and online discussions. It's a tragedy that unfolded behind closed doors, then exploded into the public eye, forever changing how America talks about family violence and justice. In the end, their case became more than just headlines. It became a symbol of how money and power can't hide emotional pain, and how the dream of perfection can sometimes destroy the people chasing it. And that brings us to the end of today's story, the Menendez brothers, murder, money, and the American dream. A case that started in a mansion in Beverly Hills, but ended with two brothers behind bars, and a nation still divided on whether they were monsters or victims. What do you think? Were Lyle and Erik driven by greed or by fear? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dive documentaries into the world's most haunting real-life mysteries. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay curious and stay aware.